Hello, welcome everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I want to thank everyone for being here. I know you've had a long day. My gosh, it's 6 o'clock and you've probably been going at the GES since like 7 o'clock this morning. And you could have chosen a lot of different places to be this evening, so thank you so much for being here with us. I want to thank everyone at Wilson Sonsini for giving us this terrific space and refreshments and everything. I hope everyone's comfortable. We've got an amazing panel here today, and I'm not going to waste a lot of time giving you an introduction. We're going to dive right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about public policy and how public policy can help or hurt the growth of startups. But we also have just an amazing wealth of experience here with all of our panelists on what it's like to start and scale a startup. So we're going to make sure we get into that with you too. And then we're also going to make sure we have time for questions from the audience because we want to make sure that you get an interactive experience with these folks too. My name is Linda Moore. I'm the president and CEO of TechNet. And TechNet is the national bipartisan group of CEOs and senior executives of technology companies who have come together to advance sound public policy at the federal level and at the state level here in the U.S. We also engage internationally on issues too that affect data flows, privacy, things like that. So I want to introduce first Kim Polese, who is a member of our executive council. She's a member of our board. We have all different kinds of companies inside TechNet. We have e-commerce, information technology, biotechnology, venture capital, and Kim actually is the chairman of the company. You have two roles actually. One is to be the chair of CrowdSmart, an AI-based prediction platform that connects startups with entrepreneurs and mentors and helps them scale up. She also is chairman of ClearStreet that helps companies cut healthcare costs and also helps their employees maintain good, sound economic advice and help and help them get on their, financial wellness. Thank you. And you've also been, let's face it, you've been the queen of Silicon Valley in the technology sector for a very long time now. She helped launch Java, the internet really changed with the introduction of Java, so thank you for that. We owe you a great debt of gratitude. And also you're an advisor to President Obama and the Department of Commerce on innovation. So your storied career in Silicon Valley is amazing. I can't wait to get a little bit more into that. You can tell us about the changes that we've seen here. But here we have, within a 20-mile radius, some of the most iconic companies on the planet. So we'll talk a little bit about what's the secret sauce that makes Silicon Valley unique and special. And Nate, who's here with us, can talk a little bit about that too. He comes from this neck of the woods, and he studied at Stanford, which you all were a guest of today. And in addition to a lot of your training that came out of Stanford and led you to where you are today, you also studied militarized conflicts at Stanford too, right? So if we want to delve into any of that with you, we can certainly get into that. But he is the co-founder of OpenGov, and OpenGov is really about providing data and an ability to collaborate among governments so that they can share the kind of information that helps them provide transparency to the folks who vote them into office and also make the right decisions on finance and a lot of other administrative decisions to get the best and most efficient use out of data for government. And then down here we also have Carine Schneider with us. Carine has a great history as a founder and a CEO of major companies, and also has played a role in big companies and small companies as a CEO and as a senior executive. She also heads up now Nasdaq Private Market. So she can talk to us a little bit about what has contributed to the flattening of startups going public and what she does to help and support private companies to launch and to scale and to eventually go public, hopefully. And then Donna Harris is going to round out the panel. Donna made a very exciting and interesting announcement yesterday, which we're going to get into when we get to talking with you, Donna. But she also is a serial entrepreneur who now runs the most well-known and probably largest incubator in Washington, D.C., a long way from here. But D.C. is a wonderful tech hub, and a lot of it is to do with Donna and all the work she's done to co-found and to head up 1776. They also are a global platform, so we'll get into a little bit about how 1776 has grown and is really connecting incubators all over the world. So first off, let's start with you, Kim. Let's talk a little bit about, from your days at Sun Microsystems and when Silicon Valley was really becoming known as Silicon Valley, and all the changes that you've seen from that time to now, and how government has played a role, for the good or for the bad, on helping Silicon Valley, become what it is today.
Right. I'm happy to address that. Thank you, Linda. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming today. Really, I'm looking forward also to the conversation because I know a lot of you are entrepreneurs, investors, and very much involved in policy issues that we'll be talking about. So, government's actually been a very integral part of Silicon Valley from the very beginning because the foundings of Silicon Valley came around, actually focused on defense. And so we had a customer, we had federal funding, we had a customer, and we had world-class universities. And those are kind of three critical ingredients to create an innovation hub anywhere. And of course, the defense industry then spawned all sorts of, the computing industry itself, and then many technology companies came from that. But funding from government and smart, focused investment, and then a customer, an end user, and then all of the intellectual capital that comes out of these world-class universities, those three critical ingredients seem to be universal. And then around that comes the growth of the supporting services industry, so the venture capital, the legal, company formation assistance, and then all the other corporate industry, the industries that can also benefit from technology innovation start to be sort of part of that whole soup. So that's what I'm seeing when I'm seeing other regional innovation hubs developing across the country, across the world. It's that combination of those, particularly those three first critical components.
Let's sort of expand on that a little bit more with Nate. Nate, tell us a little bit about your interaction with government and how government has helped, and also the purchasing power of government to help scale too.
Sure, yeah. Is that a good volume for people? So, I mean, as a startup selling to governments, we obviously are encountering government in a couple of different ways. We're feeling the regulatory environment that any business in this area would feel, and then of course we're dealing with them every day. They're our only customer. And I think what we've seen over the past 5 years growing a company is that government can really help. It's made a market for us. It's made it possible for us to build what we're building, and it's encouraged us in a lot of ways. It's also created tremendous barriers. So you brought up purchasing as one example, and it sounds like a pretty dull subject, government purchasing, and it certainly can be a lot of the time. But it's also an area when if I'm asked what can government do to drive innovation, spark good ideas, be more innovative itself, what are some changes it can make? Procurement is actually one of the top areas on my list because it's so hard for governments right now to adopt all of these great ideas and technologies that already exist out there. And we feel that all the time, and I have tons of stories about it that I could maybe get into at some point, but if you want to do business with the state of California, for example, you need a federal GSA schedule that takes 18 months, and then you need to get on a California state procurement contract that takes 6 more months. So you're now like 2-3 years in before you can do your first business with the state. And for a startup, that's going to kill you. You can't go 3 years as a startup without your first contract. So we actually built a model where we had to sell to cities first, and then counties, and then states, and then kind of grew like that. But that's a really tough model as well. So, and I think if procurement can be solved, if governments can operate a little bit more like businesses, that'll make a big difference for companies that want to grow in that market. It'll make a big difference for governments themselves. And there's a whole regulatory side as well, which I think we'll get to later. But on the procurement side, it's a lot of low-hanging fruit there.
I want to just make a comment really quickly too before we go to Carine. One of the things that it's no secret here, I'm sure a lot of you know this, no matter where you're from, the federal government of the United States moves at a really slow pace these days. Some state governments do too, but the federal government for sure. So that obviously can have a huge impact on fostering or stopping in its tracks startups. Carine, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the private market, the stalling, some would say, of companies going public, why that is the case, and the federal government's role in that.
Sure. So, again, in the U.S. side of things, we're just seeing almost a falling off a cliff when it comes to IPOs, not just at Nasdaq, but New York Stock Exchange as well. And this has been about the worst year we've had probably since 2009. So To give you an idea, one of the guys I was just talking to, last year at this time, he had taken 15 companies public. This year at this time, he's taken 1. So when people look at this, there's a drastic change that's happening now. A lot of people are hoping that this is just a momentary blip, we'll get back to it. We were just talking before we came out here and what's happening in the UK this evening. There's a lot of headwinds this year between the election, Brexit, everything else, where I think if you look at some of the articles that are starting to come out, people are saying, you know what, 2016 is done for IPOs, we're probably going to be looking at 2017. So for us in the Nasdaq private market, and I just really want to be very clear, I am part of Nasdaq, but we are the Nasdaq private market. We work only with private companies, so we're not really involved in IPOs. We are not a marketplace like you would typically think, where you would go on and say, gee, I feel like I'd like to buy some SpaceX or Airbnb. You cannot do that with us. We are a private company. We only work with companies directly. We don't work with individual shareholders, and it's a very private and confidential way that companies work. So we'll get further into it, but what we're seeing in the private market level now is a huge amount of activity. So companies are getting older. Some of the companies that we're talking about, Shazam, it was founded in 2000. I don't think a lot of people realize they're 16 years old. I mean, this is getting to be a substantial amount of time. So there's a lot of issues that private companies have where we're actually trying to solve them. One of them certainly is the length of time that these companies are going, the size. A lot of people don't realize these companies are not as large as traditional companies would have been after they were 16 years old. You don't need thousands and thousands of employees anymore to be a very successful and high-value private company. And so if we had kind of gone back 10 years from now, a lot of the companies that we work with in the private market really would have been mid-sized cap companies that would have gone public by now. So we're really seeing a huge shift in terms of what's happening with companies. I will just say as an aside, where we are seeing a huge amount of activity this year is in the Nordics. There's a great article in the paper about that today. Lots of activity up there. So if any of you are from there, I'm happy to talk to you about First North and some of the things that are happening there. That's maybe a little bit unique to what other exchanges are seeing.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And Donna, I got a chance to preview a big announcement that you made yesterday. So I want to make sure that everyone here who didn't get a chance to see that themselves yesterday hears it from you now. So can you tell us a little bit about Union?
Sure, thanks. So for those who don't know, 1776, while we're headquartered in Washington, D.C., we have a mission to find, fund, and grow companies anywhere in the world. We do that directly through campuses that we operate in power hubs around the world, so DC, New York, San Francisco, Dubai. But for the rest of the world, we work through partners who operate incubators, super hubs, campuses in their home cities, which has really become the dominant way that entrepreneurs outside of Silicon Valley are getting supported in their home communities. And so there are literally hundreds and hundreds of those things emerging in cities across the planet. So we ourselves have built and been using a tool for the last couple of years called Union to manage our own startups, to match them to mentors. We've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mentors on the platform, people like former governors, former mayors, heads of hospital systems, heads of utilities, as well as successful entrepreneurs, all focused on sort of the next wave of big challenges, which have in common the fact that government is involved. If we think about where innovation is heading, it's healthcare, it's education, it's cities, transportation, food, agriculture. Government is typically setting the rules, they own the data, sometimes they're the customer. But in every case, regulation is a challenge in those markets. So the mentors and the help that startups need is often different than a consumer-facing startup. So long story short of the announcement is that we've been repeatedly asked over the last year by incubators around the world to open up our tools to them, and so we've decided to do that. So two big things that are related to that. The first is that the Union platform is now available for any incubator, super hub, or campus in the world to use and to onboard their startups and their mentors, to access the curriculum, to share a single mentor network, as well as to share the network of customers and channel partners, so that rather than working in isolation in every single city, the startup only getting help from their local city, this allows them now to get that local help, but also get global help as well. And then the second piece of the announcement is that we and other top-tier hubs around the world are opening our playbooks to those that are launching or running their own hubs. So no need to flounder around figuring out what an incubator needs to do and how you measure success and what programming should you offer. We've got 3 to 5 years under our belts already doing it, so we can share those things to accelerate the pace that these hubs can be helping startups everywhere in the world. So, for us, utopia is that while Silicon Valley, of course, remains the top ecosystem for startups, worldwide, there's no reason why we can't make sure that other cities around the planet are great places for startups too, and they can get the best of their home community and the global community.
Thanks, Donna. And I think individual startups can come onto the union platform too, right, and access this information.
Startups that live in rural areas or cities that haven't yet figured out how to launch a hub can just come on virtually. They can apply for a direct virtual membership without having to work through a hub as well. So, we want it to be highly collaborative. So anybody who wants to be a mentor, we want to know about you and get you on the system. If you run a hub or you run a program where you've got entrepreneurs, love to work with you. If you've got content that is helpful to entrepreneurs to help them learn how to take their ideas from seed to scale, we want to put that in the platform. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to curate and organize all of the great resources that are out there so that when the startup has the idea, they don't have to flounder around and do Google searches and 144 million responses, but no idea what to do with that information, what to do when, how to do it. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Very exciting. And we will definitely put more information about this on the TechNet website, and we'll be tweeting about it too. So if anyone's following our Twitter feed, you'll be able to find all the information about what Donna announced and what she just described. So thanks for that. Very exciting. Kim, I want to go back to you really quickly. One of the things that we talk about a lot at TechNet is we have some of the biggest, most iconic companies on the planet within our membership, but also in the leadership positions in TechNet. And they all know that so many of the large companies that we think of today as dominant will go by the wayside if they don't constantly innovate. They know just as they, launched and grew so quickly and became such a behemoth, that there is another person breathing, down there and ready to take over their spot at a moment's notice. And so the desire to innovate and to always stay on the edge, is so important. And that finding those interesting startups that really can give them that next wave, that next edge, that next niche that they're looking for to stay on top is so important. Can you talk a little bit about the role that really large companies play in the ecosystem that supports startups?
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting, I'm actually seeing a kind of a cottage industry, and it's becoming fast very quickly, much bigger than the cottage industry, around connecting entrepreneurs, startups with big companies, specific needs within big companies. So large companies are realizing it's very difficult to innovate at the speed, at the rate they need to, with cycle times increasing, and it's also difficult often to attract top talent that's being lured by startups. So at the same time, they're addressing some of the greatest challenges that every industry is facing now, because they're needing to transform and disrupt their own industry. So they're actively seeking startups that, for example, address a logistics challenge that they're having that they never ran up against at the scale they're running up against it, or it could be anything. But that kind of matchmaking that's happening now between startups and large companies is becoming truly a sector unto itself. So I'm seeing venture firms that are focused on that. I'm seeing regional hubs developing around that. Actually, a lot of the most successful regional hubs, both in the U.S. and around the world, have really focused on the corporate, the industries that are within that area, and then identifying specific needs they have and connecting them with promising startups. And some, for example, Canada has an initiative called C100, where they basically pair the biggest companies in Canada with promising startups, and again, create opportunities for flow in both directions. And to the point that Carrie was making about just how the market, Carine, sorry, was making about how the markets are changing, and there's fewer IPOs, but there's in many cases flush with cash. So there's a lot of M&A happening, and so for startups, it's not kind of where it used to be just the IPO path was the path. Now there are opportunities actually to do some very innovative things within big companies, either being invested in or being acquired by and being needed as part of a large company. So lots of changes that are happening there that are pretty exciting, I think, for both entrepreneurs and industry.
Well, and Nate, I want you to tell us a little bit about, what led you to found OpenGov. what was it that made you, what was the question or the problem that you were trying to solve, and what was the opportunity that you saw with it?
Sure, yeah. As you touched on, I was at Stanford studying a combination of engineering and kind of public policy, and got involved with a group of students and alumni who were interested in that kind of intersection, figuring out how technology could be applied to policy challenges and government generally. We started a group, started doing some research, trying to figure out, okay, what are some problems that might be interesting in this world? And the first thing we tried to do is collect data, right? I mean, that's what you do when you are going to go learn about a space. You try and collect information about it. And that was really, really hard. Impossible sometimes, actually. I mean, one moment stood out when we were sending a lot of like FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests to governments, being like, hey, tell us how much you're spending on these programs, tell us how much, we want to know, what are your recidivism rates by prison, and what are your education statistics by state, and just collect all this information, see where there may be some problems, and we can apply solutions. And often they just say, I don't know, we don't know, we don't have that. Or they say we have it, but take us 6 months to get it to you, or we got one answer that was like, we can get it to you, but it's going to cost us $7 million, so you'll have to write us a check to cover the expenses of going into a basement and pulling out filing cabinets, and so we heard that over and over and over again at governments of all sizes, and we realized there's a major problem here, and it's an infrastructure problem. And it's a problem that has been in the making for the last 20 years as technology has advanced very rapidly. The world has moved forward very quickly, at least on the private sector side, and governments have not kept up. And to my earlier point about procurement, part of it's that, part of it's just really hard for them to adopt solutions, part of it is because of the perceived and actual difficulty of doing business with government, there haven't been a lot of companies trying to solve these problems in the government sector. It's been relatively underserved. So that was the world that we saw, and what we would find, I remember like one of our first customers was actually the city of Palo Alto, and I remember going to City Hall, sitting down and looking at their computer systems, and they're running green screen terminals, like Windows 95 and earlier, and I don't know how you run $1 billion, that's how much they spend every year, close to $1 billion as a city. I don't know how you run $1 billion organization with technology like that. It's hard for us to run our small company, without some pretty good technology. So saw that world, wanted to help address that, and realized that it's an infrastructure challenge, and that if we could solve the internal problems for government, make it easier for them to store this data, organize it, clean it, access it, you then enable two things. One is better decision making, and two is greater communication, because when you can put this information outside of the government in a clear and accessible way, you allow people to better understand what is my government doing, what is it not doing, how is it operating, what are the challenges it's facing, and you drive better engagement there as well.
Thank you. And Carine, tell us a little bit about your experience with the Irish government. You and I got a chance to talk about that a little bit ago. And she was the CEO of a company in Ireland, and she specifically chose Ireland to launch the company. And I'd just like you to tell the audience a little bit about that experience and why you did that.
Sure, yeah, and I actually didn't live in Ireland, so my partner, my business partner, you always have to be careful in Europe, but it means something a little different. My business partner, whose name is Melissa O'Coulihan, for those of you who are from Ireland, he and I had a long talk about starting a company. We also saw a real need. We were working in the area of stock plan administration. There were a lot of companies, if you get a stock option or anything like that, it's great for the country that the parent company is in, but if you live in another country, let's say that you're living in, Italy, and you work for IBM, it's very hard for IBM to keep track of things of what's happening in Italy. So we decided to start a company, and he told me about Enterprise Ireland. So I don't know if any of you heard of Enterprise Ireland, see some shaking heads. They're actually the step brother, sister to the IDA. So many of you probably heard about the IDA. The IDA is a great government agency from Ireland, and they work predominantly in other countries, and they try to encourage companies, and they spend a lot of time here in the United States, trying to encourage companies to open headquarters in Ireland. And so they've done phenomenally well. If you go to Dublin, it's just like driving down the Silicon Valley. Everybody's got an office there. They do great tax breaks. They do all kinds of great things. Well, Enterprise Ireland is the opposite of that. So what Enterprise Ireland did is they were looking for companies to invest in, almost like a venture capitalist. So they were looking very early stage companies, And there were some requirements that you need to meet. One of them was that you were predominantly doing a business outside of Ireland. So the idea was not to recycle money within Ireland. So let's say you wanted to make more wool sweaters. That really wasn't what they were looking for, unless you were really planning to export a lot. The second thing they were looking for was companies that were able to train local people in Ireland with skills that really weren't predominantly in the country. So the year that we applied, I think there was about 800 companies that applied for funding. We were, I think, one of the 12 who got the funding. Some maybe it was 80. I can't remember. It was a very small number. But what the government did is they said, well, we're not professional investors like a venture capitalist. So what we will do is we will fund companies, and the third requirement was that you had funding from professional investors. So they would follow on the investment. They would not negotiate valuation. They would not negotiate terms. They would come in at the same terms as your lead investor, but they would come in with a minority investment. And they did a lot of other great things. It wasn't just money, which, by the way, has paid off very well for the Irish government. But we got a lot of wonderful grants to train people, to employ people. There were always programs. There were a lot of programs where if you wanted to go, let's say, sell your wares in China, they would say, we're taking 20 CEOs over to China. We're going to set the agenda for you, and we'll make sure that you meet with the right people. So those were just wonderful programs that really helped increase our ability to become a global company quickly. The one statistic I'll pass along, I went on their website today to just check on things, and 2005, their companies that they invested in exported about $10 billion a year in sales, and now 10 years later, they've doubled that to 20 million, and they hope in the next couple of years to go to 22 billion, so it's a billion. So very impressive what they've been able to do, and of course it's been fantastic for the Irish economy. So, when we were speaking earlier, we were talking about how government can really play a positive role. And no, here in the United States, I tell everybody, I don't think Enterprise Ireland could survive here because they moved also very quickly. They understood what we needed as entrepreneurs.
Wonderful, thank you. And Donna, I want you to bring in your global perspective on this too. You're seeking to connect incubators, accelerators, startups all over the world. Where are you seeing the other big, growth areas? When you think of Silicon Valley, you think of sort of like the ground zero of, technological innovation. But when you look at the whole world, where are you seeing the big hotspots?
Yeah. Well, the focus on urban areas and the clustering of entrepreneurs in big, dense urban areas is definitely a trend that continues. Right? So you've got the New Yorks, the Tel Avivs, and you see a lot of activity happening in Paris. And so it's pretty hard to go into one of these major metropolitan areas and not see a good deal of activity, an increase in the starts, an increase in the funding, and the growth of the companies. From a regional perspective, we've been very impressed with a lot of the activity in the Middle East. When we hear about the Middle East, the narrative we're hearing isn't in the press. It isn't all about entrepreneurship. It's ISIS, it's terrorism, it's a lot of the negativity. But I would say, having gone into places from Amman and Cairo to Abu Dhabi and Dubai and everywhere in between, there are some really incredible entrepreneurs. Governments playing a key role across the region in fostering ecosystems and understanding that they cannot continue to live on the oil dollar. And so how do we build the ecosystem for the future and become the leader in smart cities in renewable energy? So you see, for instance, the UAE making commitments to becoming a completely driverless car nation. Right? You've got countries that are looking at going completely renewable. So the government has the ability there to be a catalyst because they're getting behind the future of a lot of these big industries, and the entrepreneurs then see that and jump on that opportunity to create the companies. So we run a global competition every year around the world to sort of leave no stone unturned to find interesting companies. We open it up to cities. This year we ran it about 60 cities around the world through, again, our partner hubs in everywhere from Iran to San Francisco. And we had 3,000 companies worldwide apply, all of them potentially venture backable, all of them potentially highly scalable companies. It's very hard to narrow it down to just the 60 finalists that we flew to Washington, D.C. We could easily have invested in 5 to 10 in each of the major regions across the world. So that story isn't really hitting the press because you have to get in these regions and really see that it's not about social good, it's not about charity. When we talk about entrepreneurship in Africa, there are some really incredible companies growing that are venture-backable, high-scale companies. Our winner, if you think about the trajectory of Challenge Cup, year 1, our winner was from San Francisco. Year 2, our winner was from Nairobi. Year 3, our winner was from Dubai. So you just don't know where the next really big company is going to come from. And to Kim's point, this interesting time that we're living in, where corporations are really struggling to get their arms around this digital era and what does it mean for their industries, and entrepreneurship is becoming highly distributed around the planet, it's a giant whack-a-mole game for these companies to know where's the next technology coming from that might disrupt me. And it's harder and harder to get your arms around that global sort of pool of companies, which is, again, why you sort of need these kinds of networks to be helpful. But government is playing a role everywhere we go. It's and even more so outside the United States than inside. Everything from how do we foster the environment that these companies live in? How do we play a role in catalyzing the innovation that's happening? Can we be that first funder? Great programs like Enterprise Island, that's a fantastic example. Know them well, and they're really one of the best programs out there. But a number of countries have looked at that program and said, hey, wait, we can do that too. And so the sharing that's going on, because this is now talked about, people are tweeting about it, the internet is enabling the sharing, we're seeing an acceleration of these programs that are working, spreading around the globe. So this increase of activity is only going to continue to increase, and the shift to really a distributed ecosystem around the world is really exciting.
Absolutely. And so many foreign governments are able to make those changes in regulation and laws so much more quickly than we are.
That's right.
They can enact things in 6 to 9 months where it can take years.
I think that's why here in the U.S. you see more of the activity happening at a city level than you do at a federal level. Right? It's much easier for a city government to enact a regulation change, fund or experiment with programs, and to actually get things done where we have inaction at the federal level.
Absolutely. Let's start with you two on a different line of questioning about the kind of experience that you can share in terms of being an entrepreneur yourself. So you have been a successful entrepreneur yourself. You were the former director of Startup America, and now you run 1776. When you think about the challenges you faced as an entrepreneur yourself, how does that inform the work you do today? And are the questions, the challenges the same? Are there common threads? What's it like today when you think back on when you were doing it yourself?
So it's funny that you asked this, because I just wrote a post on Medium about this week. My first company was in the entrepreneurial hotbed of downtown Detroit, right? And this was back in the day where there were literally 2 venture capital funds in the state, right? So I have the luxury of saying I pitched 100% of the venture capital funds in Michigan. I also got turned down by 100% of the venture capital funds. At that time, there weren't mentors. There weren't people who understood me as an entrepreneur, who understood the risks that were being taken. There wasn't anybody I could go to and review my decisions that I had in front of me. What should I be doing, or what shouldn't I be doing? Am I making the right decision? And what doors can you open for me? And that has never left me. And so with my work at Startup America, we were doing it in 1776, too many entrepreneurs are being told, you must move. And it's fine if you want to move. There's so many amazing resources available to you in places like Silicon Valley or New York, but a lot of people don't want to move, and I'd like to get to a place where choice really is valuable for people. And so when we think about what we're doing at 1776, we're delivering a lot of the things that I even wanted in my first venture. Right? How do we make sure that people who are smart experts are at the table? You don't have to cold call and figure out who can help me. They should already be at the table. So if you're trying to sell the school districts, let's have superintendents already willing to mentor. If you're trying to sell the hospital systems, why don't we have doctors and hospital CFOs and administrators already at the table, ready to go? And when you ask people, right, how many people here would be willing to mentor a startup? Everybody. Sure, of course. I don't want to hang out a shingle and have 1,000 entrepreneurs calling me, but if you can find a way to match make and make that work, then people are willing to do it. So it's putting the emphasis on growing companies, mentorship, expertise, customers, and connections, and capital. as opposed to it's all about capital. The only thing we need, we hear about sort of the magic bullet of venture capital funding. If only our city had more venture capital, everything would be fine. That's just not the answer. It's an ingredient, but really figuring out all those pieces so that whatever the entrepreneur needs, it's in front of them. Educational content, mentorship, all of it.
Thank you.
Can I just raise the point about also new kind of funding environment for startups? Because as Series A's have gotten bigger, the angel investment community has become, really what used to be Series A. So we now have not only a large potential group of funders, but there's a lot of money behind it. And there are many, many companies being formed every year. There are about 300,000 startups in the U.S. seeking funding, and about 70,000 get friends and family, and only about 7,000 ultimately get institutional. So there's, tremendous amount of friends and family and early stage investors that are really getting these companies off the ground. And one of the ways the government can help there, of course, is crowdfunding. And other countries have been ahead of the U.S. in that way. The UK, for example, has been a pioneer in crowdfunding. It's one ingredient, making it easier for people to, just removing a lot of kind of the bureaucracy around participating, even at a small level, is critical to making all of that work. And universities also, I think, are playing more and more of a role. Everybody kind of thinks of entrepreneurship as the new sport on campus, and as an alum, you want your school to be launching great startups. One of the things we've been working on is actually connecting alumni back to their universities to help mentor and also fund startups, because people always get asked to give money to the universities, but not for their industry expertise, connections, and potentially funding. So I think that component of crowdfunding and also the mentorship and advisory role of individuals is critical in making all this work.
I would say any of you who want to jump in at any point too, feel free. Don't feel like we have to follow the rules here. So, Carine, let's talk about you and your experience a little bit too of running a nonprofit globally too, with I think 6,000 members. I mean, I think you've also been doing some work to connect women entrepreneurs with women funders too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And just to follow up on what Kim said, I'll make a plug for a company called Business Rock Stars. So they said, when we were kids, we all wanted to be Mick Jagger and we want to be Mark Zuckerberg. They have a great, and Nasdaq Private Market sponsors a show they do. It's all online. It's called Scaling the Wall, and it's about all the mistakes that entrepreneurs have made. There's some great ones on there. CEO of Muntree, CEO of Levi, CEO of Mondavi. So it's not all tech companies. Anyways, I encourage you to go and listen to those. So yeah, I do run a global nonprofit, and I also was CEO of my own company that I founded, and then I became CEO of a company that was 10 years old that had some issues. And so I got a couple pieces of advice that I'm happy to pass along and talk a little bit about why I'm so passionate about women founders and funders. So the three pieces, I went and saw somebody, a friend of mine who was a male CEO, and I said, what would you tell me as I'm going to be a CEO for the first time? And he said, well, first of all, this is the loneliest job you'll ever have. So you can't go talk to your board, especially as a woman. You can't go talk to your board about your challenges. You can't talk to your employees about your challenges. Your spouse is going to get really tired of it, so get a dog. He's like, wow, it's good, yeah, because it is a really lonely time. And then secondly, he said, always call every board member before a board meeting. Never walk into a board meeting not knowing what board members are going to ask you, what's their issue, what's gotten their call, whatever, and really make sure that you have a good grasp of what they're saying. And that's not meant to be like cut them off at the pass, but understand what they're asking. If they're looking at your numbers and they're saying we're really worried about this thing, you should explore it before you go into a board meeting. And the third thing that a different mentor of mine told me is get your own virtual board of directors. So he said, in my mind, Robert Redford's on my board of directors, and Abraham Lincoln's on my board of directors, and I think a lot, what would Robert Redford do at this time? And so I encourage all of you to think about who's on your board of directors for you personally in your career. So I thought that was good. But being a woman it's an interesting panel for Silicon Valley because I don't know how many are from here, but you generally don't see this many women on a panel.
Nate, is this your first time being the only guy?
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that.
It's great. Yeah.
It is hard being a woman in this area. I live in Silicon Valley. It's hard in the startup world. It's exciting to see so many great role models and mentors up here. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is connecting women who are looking for funding with women who are funders. And believe it or not, women who are funders also have a really difficult time. So we're actually having a dinner in July here in San Francisco where we're bringing the two groups together, and happy to talk to anybody who might be interested to come. We're actually, we were oversubscribed within like a week of talking about it. So we're doing a lot of work on that area, but I think it is, a difficult job. I also would say, and I know Nate's in the middle of this, I think it's a ton of fun. And you just have to remember as you're going through it too that, the good days are when you're small and you're struggling and you're having a good time, because if all goes well, you'll be really successful, and then you'll be dealing with lots of different problems. So try to enjoy it.
Nate, can you tell us a little bit about access to data and how important that is for startups, and what you're thinking in this area, or what OpenGov is able to do for people in the startup area too?
Sure. Yeah. Data. That's what Silicon Valley is about now. They call data the next natural resource. So, we're on kind of the other side of that coin a little bit, because we're trying to make data more available. We think that's when we think, you were talking about having a virtual board of directors, and I think, we always try to think about like, how do we want the world to be different because of us as a company? And one of those ways is we want everybody to know, at least in the government space, everybody to know everything that's happening all the time. It's like all government, it's like Sim City. It's like you just can see everything in real time, everything that's happening. And I think access to data can make a huge difference. We're seeing even early examples in cities that make more information available to the public, people developing applications on top of it. And so, as we're thinking about what can government do to encourage entrepreneurship and startups and business, actually sometimes just making a data set available can do that. You find this new data set, and you're like, wow, I can derive these insights from it, I can build this new product on top of it. It can be everything from, there are companies that the city of San Francisco made data available on health and safety ratings for restaurants. As soon as they did that, somebody built an app that let you basically plug that data into Yelp and other services, so that when you're going to go to a restaurant, you can see, did they just get a C or a D rating before I go eat there, right? So, that's an immediate business. Or if the government makes transportation data available, that enables Google Maps and all these other apps that we rely on day to day to become more efficient and more reliable and smarter. Obviously we're struggling every day to get that information, and it's been very cool to see what people can do with what's out there.
I also want to ask you too, advice you would impart to an entrepreneur. I'm sure you have encountered, gosh, I wish I could have done that differently, and I wish I'd known back then, and that sort of thing. So when you think about, the best advice you could offer to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps, someone's been named at Forbes 30 under 30, and a lot of other, acclaim, what would you say?
It's a great question. It's a tough question because there's so many things. It's like, what would you do? What wouldn't you do? It's a huge list. I think one lesson I've learned, and that's been very clear to me, both from personal experience and also just watching lots and lots of people have successful startups, and then many more have failed startups, is focus first on something that you're really interested and care about, and then figure out if there's like a viable business there. I think a lot of people approach it from the opposite perspective. They're like, where can I go make a lot of money? And that can work, but as you said, it's really hard. All day, it's trying, it's stressful. You're constantly second guessing yourself. There's so much uncertainty. So when you're going through all that process, you need something that's driving you other than the profit motive, because you're not always sure it's going to be there at the end of the day, and you want to be doing something that you care about and that's interesting to you. That's probably the number one piece of advice I would give, is like, just find something that you are fascinated in, passionate about, even if you never think there could be a business there. Go learn a ton about it, spend time working on it, and I think with the right mindset and the right attitude, you'll find some pretty cool ideas there. Also, just throw out something else that I was thinking as you were talking about the lack of women in technology and how hard it can be a woman in technology. We have struggled to hire women as a company. I think it took us to like 10 employees till we had a single female employee. And then she left, and we were back to just all guys. I was going to guess like 15 before we got to another one. And like I look at the business side of our company, and it's all it's actually pretty balanced. It's 50-50 roughly men and women, but then our engineering product side is entirely men. It's 100%, and they've been trying to hire female engineers, and we just don't get applicants. And then when we do get an applicant, they don't want to be the first woman on a team of 40 engineers at this point. So it's a really difficult problem. So another piece of advice I think, or that I've been giving to some companies, like, hey, if you want to try and address that problem early on, is try and have a mixed gender founding team, which I don't see that often, but I think it's probably pretty cool for a company at an early stage to have a better balance going forward.
Makes sense.
Can I add one more really difficult lesson I learned, which is treat your investors like you're getting married. I mean, really think about who you're getting in bed with. Because sometimes it's like you're worried about payroll and you're just like, oh my gosh, this check is right in front of me, and all the warning signs and bells are going off in my head, but I'm just going to ignore them because they're going to make payroll. And I know that's a really, really tough position. And so A, don't get into that position, but B, if you are going to take money from someone, really understand who they are, what the relationship is, check them out. Don't just think, oh, I've got a nice wealthy person sitting in front of you, seems really nice, I'm going to just take their money. Do the due diligence.
To sort of go back to what Nate mentioned a minute ago too, Kim, I know you've done some thinking and some writing and talking about how in some ways women in technology have gone backwards in the last few years. We're producing actually fewer computer science graduates, fewer STEM-related graduates than we did back at the time when you and I were getting out of college. TechNet focuses a lot on science and STEM and making the STEM pipeline for underserved communities and also for women. But, you know, in your experience and what you've seen and what you see today, what would you say about, you know, women in technology and where it stands right now?
So I think it really is starting early. I mean, it's getting computer science in the schools very, very early. And I was lucky because I grew up here in Berkeley, and there was a place called the Lawrence Hall of Science, and I hung out there as a little girl and played on computers, and so I had this wonderful first experience, which was engaging and fascinating, and otherwise, if that hadn't been the case, I probably wouldn't have ended up in this career. So there was that first exposure, that early exposure is critical, and then something that is engaging about that computer. In my case, there was a program called Eliza, which was one of the first AI programs. It's like a virtual therapist, and it was one of the seminal demonstrations of natural language processing. It was actually developed in the 60s. But it was like so cool to have this conversation with this sort of therapist that I could get to going in a circle a conversational circle after a certain point in time. So that kind of, it's made it real, you know? And so I think more examples, first of all, again, exposure for girls getting access to computer science in, you know, really elementary school, and boys as well, but everybody. And then applications that you can relate to, so games and also building hands-on, creating stuff is so critical. Feeling like you're in charge, like you're powerful, because really being able to build stuff gives you a feeling of power. You're kind of like the master of your own universe when you can build, you have the tools to build practically anything. So, and then the third thing I would say is examples of what a career is like in technology. And it's not just the tech industry anymore either. It's every industry is becoming a technology company. Every company is becoming a technology company. So what's an example of what it's like to be a product manager, to be a software developer, or, you know, a game developer, whatever. And so talking with, getting, you know, people from industry to come into schools and talk about what they do every day and their jobs, I think is also really part of it.
I want to ask you the same question I've asked everyone else too, and that is, you know, thinking back on all your entrepreneurial experiences, are there certain words of wisdom that you would want to impart to entrepreneurs of like, really make sure you think about this, and really make sure you don't do that?
Yeah.
Or any of those kind of things?
I guess one just general observation is that you are on this emotional roller coaster. I mean, every day is kind of like, you know, first half of the day, you're going to conquer the world. Second half of the day, you know, what's the point? Let's just give up. I mean, really, you go through that continual roller coaster because really the stakes are high. You go either way, and it's all on you. And so being able to kind of expect that, and first of all, not get rattled by that emotional roller coaster you're going on with that experience. You're going to go on continuously. Having an outlet, in my case, it was dance, you know, and I just never stopped dancing, and so that was, you know, let me kind of disengage from the intensity of my work life. And have another, you know, part of my brain that I was using an identity, you know, as well. And then perseverance. I mean, really, any company takes the better part of a decade to scale, to get to scale. I mean, there are these examples or unusual circumstances where it's kind of overnight success, but really, most companies take the better part, or doing anything worthy in life, I've found, takes the better part of a decade. So just know that, be prepared for it, and when something, basically you encounter a roadblock, don't give up. Do not give up. If you develop something that is truly unique, that you know it has value in the world and the world needs, do not let that roadblock get in the way of getting it out to the world. There's always a way to get around that roadblock.
I want to take this back to Donna, too. You work with so many entrepreneurs. Do you see differences in things that are encountered or obstacles or challenges for women versus men?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that there were some just fantastic points raised by the rest of the panel. We were having a conversation earlier today about mentorship versus sponsorship. And I think that a big challenge for a lot of women is that they don't naturally have some of the networks that they need in order to get in the circles, to get the customers and the help to grow. And sponsorship isn't something that is naturally comfortable, and we don't have those people saying, hey, here's my network. Let me introduce you to people, let me bring you in, let me open doors for you in the way that men sometimes do. So that is definitely a big challenge. We've got the bridge not meeting in the middle problem as well, right? So if you're trying to build a bridge, oftentimes you build it from the two sides and it meets in the middle when you're done. There's the Lockheed Bridge in Michigan didn't, which is why that example sticks in my head. In that we need to be doing more to get more women into the tech industry and more women succeeding in the tech industry, but we also need to be teaching women and equipping them to interact within the industry, to be more confident, to think bigger, to get out of their comfort zone so that we can build that bridge from both sides. Right? So the example of we would very much like to hire women, but we're not getting the applicants. You have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to be willing to be that first one. Sometimes you have to be the pioneer. You have to be willing to pitch your firm even though you're uncomfortable. We were surprised with our Challenge Cup competition. As just an anecdote, we get the applications, you look at the founding team, it's a woman founder, you get to the actual pitch competition and there's a dude pitching. You're like, wait, I thought there was a woman founder. Well, their women are acquiescing and having their male counterpart get up and pitch. And so we've had to really think about how do we enforce that sort of within the structure of the competition to get them to be the ones to pitch the company. So there's work to be done on both sides of the equation.
I want to open it up to questions now. You've heard a little bit about the backgrounds and the perspectives of all of our amazing panelists who are so accomplished. I'd love to take some questions from the audience of what you'd like to ask. Okay, your hand was up first.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm the founder of the Hub in Singapore. It's the largest co-working thing, also the first in Asia. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for an amazing panel. I think this is the best panel I've been in just 2 days. I think you should be on the main stage and not here.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next year, yeah.
That's a very exclusive VIP.
Yeah, maybe next year in India. Yeah. My question is, as intermediaries like us, we've worked with corporates, from Unilever to AvianBev. They're seeing us as an innovation intermediary to connect them with startups, but their demands are rather clueless at this point. They always demand for a very short-lived, 1 weekend hackathon or this and that. And my question is, how can we work better? Those of us who have the trust of startups on a national level. How can we work better with government and with corporates? Because also we realize that the startups have reached a glass ceiling. It's not more investors they need, it's customers they need. And we have about 60% of the Fortune 500 headquarters in Singapore, right? And it's just a big gap of matching them with startups. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll start, and I'm sure the rest of the panel has thoughts too. Are you familiar with race car driving?
Oh, we host the F1 night.
So the NASCAR cars are driving around the track and they've got stickers all over them, right? From lots of brands. That same methodology has been applied to startup hubs, right? If you think about how the hubs originally got started and got funded, It was through the marketing departments, going to the corporations and saying, hey, sponsor our thing. It's a sponsorship model, it's a marketing model. And so that sets up an expectation that I am selling something to these startups. I want to get a return that is sort of marketing focused, it's brand focused. Many corporations that are really, at the same time that's going on, they're hiring chief innovation officers, they're setting up innovation teams, they're thinking about their own R&D spending, where is the digital economy going? It's a different part of the organization. And so getting these two things aligned so that the innovation teams understand that the hub is a place that they can come and engage. The expectation around showing up, I'm going to, introduce me to all your companies, I'm going to get 50% of them to want to do something with me. We get this a lot from law firms and accounting firms that just, they want the startups to immediately start hiring them. That helping them understand that it's a relationship that they're building, and so being perceived as a company that's startup friendly, helping them understand the value back to them of engaging to their own innovation agenda, their own bottom line in terms of the future of where their company is going, as opposed to the near term, today I'm going to make $1 off these startups. You can be the one that sets the rules for that based on how you're positioning what you're selling. We made the decision to take down all the NASCAR stickers at 1776 because we felt like we were setting the wrong expectation that was what we were selling. And when we started doing that, we took a little bit of a hit of people not understanding, well, if I can't put my logo on it, what am I doing with you? But reframing for them why they should engage with you. They should engage with you because you're the center point for entrepreneurship in your community. If they want to see what's going on in innovation in your city, you're the point of entry for that. And once they grasp the deal flow, they grasp the fact that this is where they get exposed to insights, that they can get a cross-section of the entrepreneurs, they start thinking about it differently, but oftentimes you have to get to a different decision maker in the organization.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
I was going to just jump, that was, and I was going to jump in and add to that. The universities can play a really valuable role here, and again, following on to focus on a particular issue that company or industry is grappling with in a particular company. In the case, I'm just give one example. Over at Berkeley, there's something called the Collider, which is basically a place where companies and PhD students and grad students and entrepreneurs come together, and those companies talk about some of their biggest, most seemingly intractable challenges they're having. And one example recently was one of the largest internet companies was dealing with a logistics issue that was really a computer science problem that needed a new kind of algorithmic approach. And so PhD students just dug into this. They didn't get course credit. They did it, nights and weekends because it was so exciting working on this really cool cutting edge problem, because these companies, big companies, are dealing with cutting edge, really interesting problems. So getting universities involved, and again, the entrepreneurs are part of that, because a lot of the PhD students or grad students, professors become entrepreneurs, and these companies are spun out of universities. So I'm sure that that's a really critical part of what you're doing, but a very focused approach around this idea of colliding and, again, interesting industry challenges to tackle. I found that mix is very attractive for everyone involved.
Again, thanks to all of you for doing the panel. My name is Randall Kempner. I'm the Executive Director of ANDI, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, fellow DCI. Two questions. One, totally opposite. One, at the high end, there's all this kind of conversations at the UN level and global organization level, most recently Sustainable Development Goals, which in the development space we're talking about a lot. And so I'm interested in general if you think anything that's at the multilateral level, like the Sustainable Development Goals, is relevant to promoting entrepreneurship, or whether it's just blah, blah, blah. And then on the other side, at what point and in what circumstances is it important for entrepreneurs to actually build a core competency in public policy? Most entrepreneurs would say, that's not my business, I'm not going to worry about that until the very end. I think that's probably wrong in most cases, but so when is the right time for entrepreneurs to start doing it?
You guys definitely should weigh in, but I'll just say a couple of things. On your second question, it used to be back in the day that you were $1 billion company before you had to worry about public policy. And it wasn't until you were $1 million company you had the government relations team that would help you do that anyway, that you could afford to have that. But now, especially since we have so many young companies disrupting entrenched interests, like Uber and Lyft with the taxis, and like there are a handful of people in the US who own all of the taxi cab companies, and it's regulated at the city level. So you've got laws and regulations that have been put in place, and actors in the space who are desperate to hold on to exactly what they have owned for decades. You have that kind of thing. That is, we're also seeing that in fintech, the sharing economy. I mean, so I think it's in highly regulated and entrenched interest spaces where you most have to deal with it, but it's also spilling out into a whole lot of other things related to healthcare and data and government and all of that. So all of you have perspective.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I also think I'd add to that, as technology is continuing to accelerate kind of exponentially, technology is getting further from kind of what regulations were designed to regulate, and so you're entering this very gray, weird area where like the laws don't reflect the reality of what they used to have jurisdiction over. Right? It's like you think about software, and even like we experience this when we work with governments. Like all laws around software are designed for mailing a disk that you install, and it's like, okay, well, what is SaaS? How does that work? Are you buying something? Is it a service? Is it a product? Is it it's like so we feel that all the time. We've felt that early on. I mean, we're lucky to have a lot of like lawyers that were involved in our original team that helped us, but yeah, we've needed to deal with a lot of those areas very, very early as a company.
If you pick up the book Lean Startup and you read all of the methodologies around how you scale a startup, you're not going to read about regulation in those books, right? So we think there's the need for a new playbook. We call it regulatory hacking, right? So our entire thesis is based on the idea that you need to know everything about Lean, and you need to know this new toolkit because every part of the economy is being disrupted. And you think about things like composting. We didn't have composting decades ago. And what do you do with composting as a service? Is that trash? Is that recycling? All of the gray area in the economy that's caused by new tech and new business models just creates all of this chaos that's going on. And you can meet with government decision makers, they themselves feel like they're playing this whack-a-mole game because they don't know what the next Uber or Airbnb is going to be, but they know they're sitting on a stick of dynamite because all the regulations that they have under their domain are out of date. Right? But they don't have the time to press the pause button, go rewrite all the rules, and then restart on the innovation because entrepreneurs are already running down the path so fast that the government can't keep up. So it has to be a key core competency of entrepreneurs. We're not talking about lobbying. Certainly that's a tool, but public affairs, grassroots, grass tops, how do you get in and educate lawmakers? Because how many lawmakers actually understand artificial intelligence, artificial reality, drones, data, big data, devices, mobile? They don't, right? Most of them don't have a background in technology. So even if it's just educating the lawmakers on what the technology does and what the possibilities are, we can preempt the bad decisions with unintended consequences that end up keeping innovation from happening.
That's what TechNet does, honestly, right?
Yeah.
You know this very well. What we do is we educate policymakers at the federal level and at the state level on what is really going on. You can imagine if you're an elected official, you could not even begin to possibly imagine keeping up with the fast pace of change, of innovation in all different parts of the technology sector. It's hard for us to do it, and we work in it every single day. So a lot of what we do is bring together our companies and the ones that require the most attention and the most care and the most literally just holding their hand and introducing them to the lawmakers are the smaller and medium-sized companies because they are completely new and different and something that is just really hard for the elected officials to understand. And they are disrupting laws and regulations that were put in place decades ago that they're running completely headlong up against. And elected officials also have a tendency to want to put laws in place that, just as you mentioned, they'll be passé in a year. Because the next big thing that's gonna come out is gonna be completely different, better, new, different, that is not what they put in place a year ago in this law. So part of what we do is sit down with lawmakers, because, example, California, 2,000 laws, 2,000 bills come out of the California legislature every year. So while it moves slowly at the federal level, it's moving so fast at the state level, all across the country, but California, where you sit today, 2,000 bills, and a lot of them related to tech. So we sit down with lawmakers and say, what are you trying to do? Let's understand what it is you're trying to do, and let's help you craft a bill that does that, but doesn't have unintended consequences that are just going to quash innovation.
How do you start that conversation to be able to, understanding that the bigger asset you have, you know what's going to be those here is maybe 3 steps, and we're at step 0. How do you start that conversation?
You say with governments?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. Not sure I figured it out, fully either, to be honest. So we should trade ideas or something. But I think for us, so one thing that's been very helpful is seeking out the like-minded people in government, because they do exist. Oftentimes they're not the loudest voice. Sometimes that's by design, they can suppress or whatever. But we found that if you start meeting enough people, you can find allies in government, people that think the way you do, are frustrated as well with the system, have a vision for how the world can be different. And we've tried to find those people, give them the tools to have greater influence within their own organization, to elevate their profile. And that's been really helpful for us. Taking like bite-sized chunks and doing it a little bit at a time. Like, in our case, we've kind of focused on, as I was saying, like city level government. It's just, you were saying this earlier, it's like cities are just so much more nimble and responsive, flexible. It's like we can do a lot more in the city. So kind of practicing there, almost like getting our models down and our experience in that level, and then slowly working our way up to bigger and bigger organizations has helped too. And I don't know that there's a magic bullet per se. Those two have really helped us a lot, but it's a long process. I mean, as you're saying, it's going to take a long time.
One thing I would just offer is that TechNet was founded in Silicon Valley in 1997 for that very reason, because a few guys got together, they weren't guys, but Kim, you were there at the beginning too, said, you know what, we have to interface directly with government. Like, they need to know what we want and what we need to grow. And we have got to really put serious time and effort into it, and we're stronger together than we're ever going to be all separate. So they formed TechNet so that there was a place where all the innovation-oriented creators of these amazing companies could band together to interface directly with government. And so that's what we do, is bring together the innovation community with policymakers, because they need to be schooled on this. They need to understand directly from the people creating the jobs, this is what you have to do. This is unacceptable, this is what we need.
Yeah, and actually to that point, I think kind of a third thing I'm thinking about that was very helpful is getting help, right? I mean, whether it's an organization like this, or in our case, finding people who work in government for a long time and have the connections and have the institutional knowledge, are going to know what the pitfalls are going to know how to speak that language, and just getting those people on your team, former government employees in our case, was very helpful.
I don't know if you're participating with Global Entrepreneurship Network. So I'm on the board of GEN, and that organization is designed to bring together the governmental decision makers and the people who are going to influence them to do ecosystem building around startups. So they're present in 183 countries. It's a great network for you to get connected to peers that are doing the same thing in their own country, so you can learn from them. What worked in your country, would that work in my country? It's just a great peer community to belong to.
I have one more thing too, which is speaking from a stock exchange. Get in touch with the stock exchange in Vietnam. You'd be surprised. I mean, we provide technology to about 140 exchanges around the world. The stock exchanges really want to help. They want you to be successful. So we at Nasdaq, we do a ton of lobbying, we do a ton of supporting. If somebody calls us and they're having a problem, we want to know what it is, because it's in our best interest that you go do well. And yet at the same time, we have a bigger brand, we've got a lot of deep pockets, we've got a lot of ways to help entrepreneurs. So I would say if you're particularly having an issue in Vietnam, reach out to the exchange to help.
We promised we did at 7:30, but are y'all okay if we take one final question?
Sure.
Okay. Let's go with one last question. Yes.
So So, hi, my name is Rafi, and I founded a e-health startup in Armenia, in Yerevan. My question was really related to, at one point you mentioned that TechNet was founded essentially as almost like a lobby group, right? Just to tell the government this is what we need you to do and this is unacceptable. My question is, to what extent, I mean, we all seem to understand that to a large extent, the regulatory framework has a tendency to slow down the technological development and innovation. But to what extent is that also, a legal issue, in the sense that, obviously we're trying to develop, in a common law system, you always have to update your laws in order to deal with issues such as virtual reality and so on, which were not problems before. And then to what extent does what the IT community need conflict with other obligations of government? Is also kind of an interesting question for me. So, for example, with the company we have in Armenia, we have a lot of issues legally in terms of working internationally. Most of our clients live in Canada and the United States and Western Europe. In general, I mean, the tech industry in Armenia is very big. It's something like 15% of the country's GDP, and they have all these big, actually a lot of companies here that have offices there, Microsoft, Oracle, and so on. And so they have formed a similar organization called the Union of Information Technology Enterprises, which lobbies the government for pro-technology legislation. But in many cases, the government will, on the one hand, embrace this, but then do a 180 and do the exact opposite. Because they'll argue that, yeah, this is good, we want the tech industry to grow because it creates jobs, but on the other hand, they have other priorities and these tend to conflict. So I don't know, how do you remedy that, and how do you approach the government in a better framework?
I'll jump in with one thing, but then I'll leave it. So I think that building bridges, relationships, and common goals with other sectors of the economy is really a good, important thing. And also stressing that the overall competitiveness of your country, it can really be found in the tech sector. Those two things, I think, is one way to start. And also realizing right away what your weaknesses are and who your enemies are, the people who are going to be against what you want, and try to address those right up front.
Yeah, that helped. Actually, that was very close to what I was going to say. And to that point, so yes, the economic competitiveness issue, even the U.S., when we go to Washington, we talk about how, the UK and France even, and some of these other countries are actually doing a lot better than we are at removing roadblocks and creating streamlining. That gets a lot of attention. And so for every country, you want to be economically competitive. So obviously, you have to find countries that would be sort of, that Armenia would, feel are sort of similar enough and from an economic competitiveness sense, it makes sense. But that's one thing. And I'd also say that finding a way to make people heroes. I always think about when I'm having trouble getting someone to agree to something, or I want, an outcome, desired outcome. I try to put myself in their shoes, and how will they be a hero? How can I help them be a hero? And oftentimes this is back to political strategies, right? But in life in general, that's just another thing to throw in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. They should be lauded for being pro-innovation. So find ways to do that. So there's a carrot. Yes. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it so much.